What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? And again, I say, what's happening? Blues people, folklore people, ethnography people, ethnomusicology people, anthropology people. And I think we have a couple of political science folk and sociologists, thanks to W.E.B. Du Bois. Welcome, welcome. There's another AFS African American Folklore section live. Today we are honoring and spotlighting the creators and participants of the Notable Folklorists of Color and expanding the frames. But before we get into all that, let's get this introduction of who's here and what going on. Please, let's start with the ladies and then we go to the gentlemen.
What's up, everybody? My name is Maria Lewis. I'm from Horse Cave, Kentucky, but I am living in Louisville, Kentucky. I am the education library coordinator at Simmons College of Kentucky. I'm also a folklorist community scholar, and I also worked on the Notable Folklorists of Color as a bibliographer and finding photos. That's me.
You know, I'm ashamed I don't have a sound, an applaud sound. We need to get that. Brother Todd.
Hello, everybody. My name is Todd Lawrence. I am an associate professor in the Department of English at the University of St. Thomas, which is in still frigid and snowy. I'm looking out the window right now. St. Paul, Minnesota. I am a folklorist. I also teach African American literature and expressive culture and cultural studies. I am a member of American Folklore Society and co-convener of the African American Folklore section. Another thing that I do that I want to call to everybody's attention is I'm one of the directors of the Urban Art Mapping Project, where we map and archive street art, especially street art that came into existence after the murder of George Floyd. So you can check us out at urbanartmapping.org.
Yes, yes, yes. Another applaud is due. We
Snap,
have to celebrate the work.
snap,
There you go. We got to
snap.
celebrate the work.
I'm just happy to be here with y'all.
Yes, and I'm Lamont Jack Pearley. I pride myself in being an applied public folklorist with a footing in academia. I'm in Bowling Green, Kentucky, by way of Brooklyn, and I produce this magazine and do a lot of broadcasting, and that's it. They always celebrate the blues people. So we have, I guess we could jump into our announcements before we bring on our guests, right? So again, this is a broadcast sponsored by my organization, my magazine, as well as the American Folklore Society. They're sponsoring it as we present our section, which is the African American Folklore section of the organization. Todd and I co-convene the section. You can join the section. We actually urge you to join the Miss Marilyn, the president of the organization. How are you? It's great to see you too. So she's saying great to see us, and a special shout out to you, Maria. Matter of fact, why am I reading this? Let's just do this. So, Miss Marilyn, you can correct me if I'm incorrect, but we are again asking you all to join the organization, and once you join the organization, you could join any section you want, but we want you to join our section as well, right?
And our section is new. I mean, it's kind of strange that you would think that the American Folklore Society didn't have an African American folklore section, but we just started it recently in the last couple of years. We do have the 4AF, the Association of African and African American Folklorists, which is a sort of different organization, separate but also within. So And one of these times we should have a live stream to talk about the history of that organization as well. But
Absolutely.
but this section within the AFS is relatively new, so we're trying to get people to join. And actually, we have a lot of members so far, but we can always use more. And especially, we can use your dues to do the things that we are trying to do as a section.
So basically, we need the cash, the money.
Yeah. Right. And one of the things that we're trying to do, well, not even trying to do, we are actually doing is we initiated, and we have a award called the John Wesley Work III Award. How many of you are familiar with Mr. Work's work? You could drop it. You could drop a line. So John Wesley Work is a historian, educator, ethnomusicologist, and composer. Third generation, possibly fourth generation Fisk. Student and teacher. He went to Columbia. He is the one who doesn't get credit, but is credited. Hey, Missouri Folk Arts is found and interviewed McKinley Morganfield, better known to y'all as Muddy Waters, when he did work with Fisk, Library of Congress, and Alan Lomax. And we have established this award for those who, I'm looking at my notes. Please forgive me. I can't remember everything. So what we look to do is honor and spotlight applied folklorists, ethnographers, and ethnomusicologists who actively focus on the research, documentation, recording, and highlighting of African American culture through performance, written word, and music in their scholarly works. Now, with that being said, wrong note, excuse me. It's a $500 award, and you can go here to apply. You can also go to Jack Dappa Blues Radio and TV YouTube, look under live, or the African American Folklorist.com to see the archived interview of this section, as Todd and I interviewed Mr. George Geo Cooper, who is a Fisk alumni, also a musician, a composer, and someone who studied under and is extremely familiar with Mr. Work's work. And now I'll pass it on.
Can I jump in and just say that you do not need to be a member of AFS to apply for this award. In fact, we are looking for folks that are out, doing the work wherever they're doing it. And so we hope that this award will be an opportunity for folks to get involved with AFS and our section, so that we can get involved with the work that you're doing and get connected to it. So folks out there who may not even think of themselves as folklorists, I mean, I hope that they do, but they might call themselves something else. You're doing work in the community with folks, with their traditions, with their material culture, et cetera, et cetera. Take a look at this application and see if it sounds like it's talking about you.
Yeah, you know something, I think that is such a great point. We need to focus on something real quick that can lead us into today's topic in the next 6 minutes. So some folks who are doing the work and don't refer to themselves as, some folks that do the work and are not, or omitted because of being other, if you will. Let's talk about briefly, so what are some of the works that could be done that people don't realize they're doing folkloristic or ethnographic work, but it actually is? Maybe so we can give those who are not a part of the discipline a little bit of understanding.
You want to go, Maria? You want me to go?
You go.
Well, I mean, like, there's lots of, this is a conversation that we've been having for many years within the society. How do we reach out to people who are doing this kind of work in the community, but they're not doing it as academics or even as public folklorists, which we, the term that we use within our discipline. But there are people, for example, who are storytellers, or there are people who are, these are people who practice, right? Storytellers, traditional musicians, people who are craft folks who are making, whether they're doing folk art or they're doing engaging in kind of like folk art, folk creation, like, I don't know, carving bowls or things. There are all kinds of things that people do, that is the creation of that material culture. And there are people who also work with these people, right? Like, who study the work that they do, who engage with them, trying to archive this work or preserve the traditions, etc. So there may be folks who are doing this who are not, who do not call themselves folklorists, and we want to reach out to them and help them to understand that maybe what they're doing is folklore, right? People who are making clothing, traditional clothing, people who are in foodways, like people who are looking at the food traditions, the culinary traditions of different groups, especially African Americans. So for us, the African American section, we're focused on African American folklore. But I think we mean this invitation to people who are working in all manner of different communities, that American Folklore Society wants to connect with you. So, when we come to a city, and we're coming to Portland
next
meeting. So in the 2023 annual meeting will be in Portland. We always try to connect with folks who are doing work in the community wherever we're going to. So we're going to be working on those connections right now. And so if there are folks out there, who are doing something, and I think that would be especially appropriate if, like, somebody in Portland is doing work in Black communities, for example, with traditional storytelling or whatever it might be, to maybe think, like, our last award winner was a woman who basically does miniatures that depict Black life.
Right, Karen Collins.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't know that would have, like, jumped out to me right off the bat, like, oh, this is folklore. And when we saw the application, we were like, oh my gosh, yes, she is doing folklore. I mean, she's depicting, like, studying, observing, and then creating these miniatures that show us these sort of scenes of Black life, and
Right.
It's really amazing work.
Right. I would go as far as saying she's an active participant,
Mm-hmm.
right? And of an extension of something that actually happened. And what's that much more amazing about her work is she scaled down locational folklore
Mm-hmm.
into a space that still encompasses the Black space, but enough to be in an exhibit so we can, like, from the outside, look at ourselves almost reflectively. And to just piggyback off what Todd said, all of these things are folk life, are tradition. If you're a rapper, it doesn't even have to be artistic expression, even though at the end of the day it becomes artistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can look at architecture vernacular in the Black community, how a lot of these buildings or homes or even cabins or shacks, how they could resemble the pattern, the meaning behind these spaces that a lot of us grew up in. I know, coming from the East Coast, there's what we call back blocks, and there's projects and these different and tenement buildings and court buildings. So there's all these kind of things that people study that or document or preserve that they don't know or realize or wouldn't equate it to being in our discipline, and you are actually in our discipline.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I think, and you to let me know, it's about that time to bring in Olivia and Phyllis.
All right.
So welcome to the show, ladies.
We're glad to be here.
All right, good to be here.
Yay, nice to see you too.
They can listen to you all chat.
I guess before we jump into it, it would be a great idea, I think, for you, Olivia and Phyllis, to please introduce yourselves your work in the discipline and everything of this nature?
Go ahead, Olivia.
Go, Phyllis, go to it.
You can do it first.
All right. Well, I'm Olivia Cadaval, and I've been around a bit. And I guess through my many years at the university, which means many festivals I curated, working with many communities. And I guess my great passion is recognizing that, first of all, recognizing that all the people that are doing the work and are not called folklorists. This is where we work, and recognizing the community and being accountable to the community, and many times being part of the community. That, and I have not found, just working towards what collaboration may mean. Because most times collaboration is in our terms, and that's not collaboration. Collaboration always opens you to vulnerability and learning and new culture, a new way of understanding and surviving. Anyway, that's me. I'm a failed retiree. I stole that from Dan Sheehy, I do have to say.
Well, you use it better. How about that?
Well, I think it has become a club of failed retirees. I am Phyllis May-Machunda. I have been working in folklore studies since the mid-1970s. I am a folklorist and ethnomusicologist. I am Professor Emerita from American Multicultural Studies at Minnesota State University, Moorhead. But before that, I was a curator at Smithsonian, working with local communities and doing work similar to what Olivia just described, trying to collaborate with communities, not to fit communities into my ideas of who they should be, and looking broadly at our arts and humanities and crafts expressions in the field. So I am the lead curator for the Notable Folklorists of Color exhibitions. The first one I did with Olivia, and it was a wonderful collaboration. And the second one I did with Olivia and Sojin Kim, who is also at the Smithsonian.
So we're going to jump into that. Before we jump into that, the two of you said something, and you both made sure that we all understood the significance of this piece of information that you two shared. And it's collaboration and not fitting your idea on the community, but being a vessel to facilitate what the community wants through this collaboration. And then you ultimately collaborate with each other to do such brilliant work. Could you speak to us on why is it so important to collaborate, and then why is it significant not to put your vision of the community, but actually take what they want and facilitate their desires?
Well, let me begin with that. In the 1980s, I came up with the term community scholar. And I came up with that term, which was picked up in our field. I came up with that term because, we're going out in the field and we're asking people to share their information. And it's not information that we usually know. They teach us their knowledge. They share our knowledge. And, so it's not a matter of the expert coming to the community and identifying that you have knowledge, that you have something that would benefit the world. It is that in dialogue, we start building a relationship in doing this work, and people share with you, if they trust you, some of their knowledge. And if we're fortunate, it's a gift that they share. And we're not going to empty vessels. We're really, engaging with ancestral knowledge, community knowledge, that they're willing to share with us. Allow us to present it, but it's not, we're learning from them. And I feel like we have to respect that. And I think in some of the earlier days in the field, we didn't see people as knowledgeable. And I think that's a shift that I've been wanting to be part of. And they often have their own visions of how they want to present themselves. And so I have wanted to be a part of acknowledging that and respecting that and building relationships that are equitable and accountable and responsible.
And oftentimes, it's times of really different ontologies. Then people come from different ways of where to get to knowledge. And if we are not sort of open to follow some of these little spaces that we have no idea what it is, we'll never know how they make decisions. People are very wise. People know how to, I don't want to use manipulate you, but lead you to what they think they know that you can take in. And communities are very, very savvy. And so it's more than a learning process. I think it's really risking your security, our sense of entitlement, and opening up and say, hey, no, this is not all, simple. Oftentimes you run into people that I'm not sure why I got into that. We're not responsible for their lives. They are responsible for their own lives. I am responsible for the way I comport myself with them. And understanding that you're really a minimal piece, but then it can be major. I mean, oftentimes I've done a lot of programs at the Folklife Festival working with countries. And for these people from the countryside, oftentimes, to be recognized as, this is your culture, the governments are not quite sure that that's how they want to see themselves on the national mall. So that's also that other challenge. We're dealing with lots of different worlds. And the times you have, like with the Shuar that I worked with in Ecuador, that the person I was interviewing and bringing to the festival, he was also the president of the Shuar community in Ecuador, which meant, it's like equal to president. So, who am I telling him? And he looks at me and says, who are you, the Smithsonian, to tell me that you're going to show my culture and that I'm going to benefit from it? A larger reality is very different. just to confuse it a little bit, Phyllis, because I think you cover things so beautifully. It has been great to collaborate with her. And as I get older, things slip out of my mind very quickly.
That was
It's been
beautiful.
wonderful to collaborate with you too.
Peace, brother Walto. Just have to always give the shout out. He's a good brother, and he's a American Indian in Oklahoma and Seminole historian and member actually. Maria, Todd, would you like the next question?
Yeah. Okay. You want to go ahead, Maria?
I'm like, you go ahead.
Okay. I know there is a script we're supposed to be going asking our questions off of, but I'm gonna break it right now because that's what I do. Can you just for our audience, for those who are not familiar with the project at all, could you talk about the inception of the Notable Folklorists of Color exhibition? Where did this idea come from? How did it get started? I think a lot of people are just really curious to know who dreamed this up and how did it become a reality?
Phyllis. Lead us on.
Actually, while I was on the executive board, we were coming up on the anniversary of the CDC, the 25th anniversary of the CDC. And Jessica said, "Oh, would you put a little something together to celebrate that anniversary?" And I asked, "What are you thinking?" And she said, "Oh, maybe you could highlight a few, two or three ancestors." And I said, "Well, how many do you really want?" She said, "Well, maybe 10. I said, "Do you want them to be all African American? Because I could do that easily." And she said, "No, let's make it more diverse." And I turned around to Olivia and said, "Would you join me in doing this project?" And she said, "Yes." And so we've been partners ever since. So what we did in 2019 was look at the legacies, remembering our ancestral legacies. That's the name of that exhibition. And we selected 25 folklorists of color. We decided to feature those who were part of the American Folklore Society or had something to do with the American Folklore Society. And we made it multicultural. So we had Native Americans and Latinx folks and African Americans and Asian Americans. And it was really amazing to have that part of our history visible.
And it was
because,
sorry, I'm very bad about interrupting.
Go ahead.
And it's interesting to see as we cut across different cultural communities, which we seldom do, and pile up together. We found we saw the emergence of these landscapes, these cultural landscapes, these scholarly landscapes. And we can get into that later, but that was, as we drew up away from the very detailed essays we were working on, we saw these great things, these configurations taking form.
There were a number of scholars who had done tremendous work in the field. And so, as I mentioned in my essay that you got at the Tulsa meetings, it's called, I will hold it up, it's called Recentering the Periphery, Coloring the Discourses, and Expanding the Frames. It's a guide to both exhibitions and lists all the people that we feature and puts them in some context. What we emphasized in that first exhibition were people who would have identified as folklorists and worked in the traditional frames and venues that folklorists do. And I mentioned in that essay that, you know, in the 100th anniversary, which was probably 35 years ago this year, these people were barely mentioned. And I thought, you know, how could we forget that? It's history that we need to bring forward, especially since the CDC had been working for many of those years. And many of those people were my mentors, like Gladys Marie Fry and Bill Wiggins and Jerry Davis. Or there were colleagues, Beverly Robinson. And then there were people who were in much earlier, John Mason Brewer, for example. People whose work we should know, but it wasn't being taught anymore. It wasn't in people's memories. The second part of the exhibit, expanding the frames, expanded our notion of what a folklorist is, looking at the people who were doing work in their own communities and had published folklore material about it. And we found 135 of those people. And, you know, we didn't get all of them either. But it's really...
Earlier, it was also with the performers. That was so important to get the performers that are in themselves, not all of them, but in themselves, they are folklorists and they're teaching others and building the discipline.
Yes. It wasn't just practitioners, but people who were really passing it on, even if it was through some oral or embodied means. You know, so we got some dancers, some musicians.
Corrido singers who were, you know, telling the history.
Yes. These people were really important in maintaining histories of traditions, histories of communities, histories of regions of the country, and often examining them and theorizing about them.
You know, just shaking also the foundations of, you know, who is the scholar,
yes,
you know, who calls the shots, you know, at all levels. It's I mean, I do it, you all do it. So just, you know, bringing it forth with the real people that have committed to their traditions. And
yes,
community very key.
Yes. So once again, we have Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, Latinx people from multiple communities, African Americans, and Asian Americans from multiple communities.
Yeah, we had a little problem, well, not problem, but we toyed around with the idea of Latino, Latine, Latinx, Latino, whatever. But also, you know, there's in like New Mexico, they have never felt they're Latino, they're Hispano, but not Hispanic. So, you know, in that little subtlety, just throwing it in there, and, you know, people will pick it up, I hope, and contribute to that discourse. Oh, and then, of course, there's all the Native American, Latin American immigrants to this country. Are they Latino? Are they Mixteco? You know, it's It's complicated. But it's, you know, it's a texture of our discipline that we might be missing otherwise.
Right. There are complex discourses about identity in our communities that we often don't tackle. There are challenging histories, which the communities do tackle, but our discipline has not necessarily addressed. Histories of violence toward them, and histories of mixing, and histories of negotiating racism and sexism and classism,
So,
and even heterosexism.
right. So, may I ask you a question? Because this negotiation is also first you mentioned that they would be considered a folklorist today, but at those days that's not what they were called. So there's a couple of negotiations happening. Also, the negotiation of being omitted that their work had to be handed in. Well, let me do more of a question. Did a lot of these people of color works have to be submitted through non-black lens or non-color lens or non-women lens?
Yes, yes, we encountered that, and some were even submitted under colonial lenses and the lenses of segregation, you know, and so we talk about those who were trained as folklorists and those who were not. There are very few institutions in communities of color that train people to be folklorists. You know, segregation meant that you didn't get into the folklore programs for a long time. But that doesn't mean that people were not writing about their cultural traditions. We have Frederick Douglass, who wrote, you know, what we call an autobiography, but it's also an autoethnography.
We're talking about a question, you know, who's framing what scholarship is.
Yes.
That's very threatening. I really, very, very threatening.
There's also, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's Maxidiliac, who's known as Buffalo Bird Woman, who wrote about the experience of being moved off the reservation, moved off their lands and onto the reservation. Another ethnography, autoethnography. And she details, you know, being fed foods that were not part of her cultural tradition and trying to maintain certain things. She maintained a garden that was of the traditional foods. That's how we know about Hidatsa foods and how they ate. And she was doing this in the 1800s. There are people who have used the folklore, they center their scholarship in folklore and use it for cultural critique and cultural criticism. And we featured some of those people, like Toni Morrison, Yuri Kachiyama, Grace Lee Boggs, James Baldwin, you know, and huh?
Gloria Saldúa.
Yes, yes, that's right. Yes, Gloria Anzaldúa.
Yep.
And what I was thinking about earlier today was that concrete divide between the scholar and the folk really melts away when you look at the work of these people. You know,
Maybe the paradigm of the subject and the subject is still there, and that's what we're really, that's our greatest boundary, to break that down. That there is
yes,
not of you and me separate.
yes,
What do we get from you and what do you get from us? That's not often, you know, talked about, although I've been challenged. You know, what do I get to go to the Smithsonian? Who needs the Smithsonian? How can we make it our Smithsonian? That's a challenge.
yes.
So I have a quick question going off our other questions over here, but I'm just thinking, you know, since we, you know, have these wonderful folklorists of color, do you see this being taught in the classroom,
Yes,
like
we want
soon?
it to be. Uh,
Can it be a part of something?
there are some people who really buy the more traditional academic ways that the field has developed as the way that folklore should develop, but it doesn't include everyone. It's not inclusive, and it needs to represent more people. It needs to represent the breadth of the work in the field.
And we consciously built it so that it would be accessible to students for them to do their own investigation, because, you know, they're very short little essays, very good little essays from very different perspectives from within, but there's also bibliographies. And, you know, students can go in it and, you know, put their own frameworks on them and, you know, learn by themselves, which is really, I think, very valuable. And that is something that Phyllis has always been very conscious as a good teacher and needing resources all the time to really make it accessible.
I think that that's important, and it's also important that you see the variety of ways that people of color have engaged with the field. Some have followed the traditional models in the field. Some have created their own models in the field because they wanted to speak to something that the traditional work and scholarship in our field didn't address. Many of them, besides Zora Neale Hurston, blend folklore with literature and creative work. And it's a living tradition. I think you see that people respect the tradition by letting it live and nurturing it and teaching it and not expecting it to be static.
But I might make a little tiny disclaimer here. There are in the non-people, whatever people that are not colored, whatever people outside the people of color, who are our colleagues and are really with us, and we have learned from them, and they have learned from us. And we just
yes,
be clear, you know.
And you see those interactions.
The bad, and the ugly.
Well, first, to those that are engaging with us that are commenting or passively watching, please don't hesitate. If you have a question for one of our featured guests, Phyllis or Olivia, just ask in the chat and we will make sure that we relay your question to them. I want to piggyback off the education conversation and the fact that they were writing, a lot of these folklorists of color were writing autoethnographic pieces, because a lot of the readings, if you will, based on the discipline or those who were out in the field and wrote about their experiences, omit these findings that you're sharing, right? Because I've read some that even said no one is doing this kind of work or that kind of work. And I mean, we all can rattle off names of people that were actually doing it, particularly at the time some of these things were being written. How much of that is a factor or was in the front of your mind as you were working on this? The fact that, you know, our ancestors and those who come before us, their work was actually omitted as if it didn't even exist.
That's probably
Well,
where we started.
I beg you. Go ahead, Olivia.
Well, that's probably where we started this project, really recognizing that how can these people have been omitted? All these, all this scholarship been omitted. Partly.
Yes. And, when I went through graduate school, people were getting a little bit more than in the in the 70s, mid 70s, early 80s. People were getting a little more of these people than they are now. So they sort of dropped off the radar. And I think that had to do with, in the 70s, was the consciousness of the civil rights movement. And, by the 80s, it was diminishing. But I also think that segregation structured our institutions of learning, and consciously or unconsciously that they were maintained. And some of the people got dropped after they died, and weren't there as a presence. But I think that we have an opportunity to live up to the ideals that our field has said that they want to do, and bringing these stories forward and making the resources of their bibliographies. Each panel has a bibliography with it of the works that featured person has done. Bringing that forward gives us an opportunity to reclaim those stories and that knowledge and move toward more equitable frameworks in our field.
I would just love to ask a question about, and hearing so much more about the project again makes me want to just thank both of you and everybody who is involved with this, because I just think like it's so important, and it has such is going to have such an impact on the field moving forward. And I wondered if maybe you all had any thoughts about whether the ways that this project exists says something about the different place that the field is in now, as opposed to, let's say, 50 years ago, or, in these, because it seems to me that a lot of these folks that you're rediscovering in the project would have been, present, had people, not just that they just sort of like forgot them, but like they intentionally left them out because they devalued their work. And it is this project's existence now show us that, we are turning not just, folklorists of color, people who are on the margins in the field, but the field itself is sort of reevaluating and thinking like, no, there's something valuable here that these folks had to offer, and we need to turn back to it in order to strengthen us in this very moment.
Well, that's the argument for doing this work. I think, but that's what I meant when I said that our institution and field were shaped by segregation. That, you look, the whole structure of the folk sets up that issue where you have the civilized, the educated, and then there are those people out there, those peasants, those
primitive, obscure folk.
Yes, primitive, obscure folk who can't quite think well enough to be civilized, and they were supposed to be studied but not seen. They were okay for studying, and in fact, there's a native ancestor scholar, Will Long, who supplied information for 6 anthropological dissertations, 6 of them. And he confronted them about the benefits that they were getting and what he and his community was getting in return. And he had hoped to preserve knowledge because the tribes were being removed and put on the reservations and were put through cultural genocide. So he was trying to preserve that information. But he had also hoped that he would benefit in and be recognized in some of the ways that these scholars were recognized, because they were benefiting off of his knowledge. And he was aware of it. And the assumption is that the folk aren't fully aware of these relationships, and that's how segregation and racism sort of distorts the lens and contributes to that invisibility.
To pick up on your other thread about the shift today, I think it is very, very significant that
Yes.
the American Folklore Society sponsored us from the top. My God, I've been on the diversity committee for 300 years, and we were always, yeah, we've taken care of that. They've got their committee now. And, it's significant. Working with Jessica has been another colleague who understands that, something has to be opened.
Yes, I totally concur with that. This would not have been possible in some earlier generations. And rethinking about what folklore can be in the future, and that democratizing, egalitarian relationship, I think has opened some doors to have voices heard that were not heard before.
So first, I would like to take a moment to celebrate Jessica Turner, because she is a revolutionary in that sense. I would like to I want to get back to this because this is very significant for many reasons, but I would like to ask, what was the process of putting this together? How did you guys put this together? Where did you go? What were you doing? Please.
Well, we have a lot of colleagues talking about collaboration. Wow. A lot of colleagues that come with different knowledge, different suggestions that like to write or they will learn to write. And there is a huge young population that without them we would not have been here. So Phyllis, you can take that one, but it's been collaboration from the beginning. All the essays are written by people from those communities. And that took a lot of arm twisting.
Well, many people were ready to jump on board, actually. Yeah. But it's been a collaborative process from the very beginning with AFS saying that they'd sponsor it. And I kept on saying, okay, I'd like to do this. And Jessica said yes. And Olivia said yes. And Sojin, who unfortunately could not be with us this evening, said yes. So part of the work was having a great leadership team. Olivia and Sojin and I worked our networks and asking people to participate.
And it was very interesting with some of my colleagues participating. They told me, hey, Olivia, I discovered things that I did not think about before with this particular lens, which is very interesting.
And then we put together a list of the scholars that we knew or had run across, and I used Google religiously to find information on all of them. And then we thought about what we wanted to our little panels to look like, and gave a template and sent it out, and people came back, and we edited things in a team manner. All three of us edited everything. And we went back to the authors and
negotiated.
Negotiated or made recommendations, and so that's that part of the process. There were several. Usually African American faculty and many faculty of color, for example, have lots of different things to do, and we caught a few at the wrong time in their lives at that point, but we found a number of people who were really willing to contribute. So we had 50 collaborators work on the projects, and that was wonderful. That was wonderful.
And all those writers created a network in itself, which is important. And we kept, insisted in including young people, young scholars.
Yes, and we wanted to highlight. We wanted to highlight scholars of color. So scholars of color wrote the pieces, and scholars of color were featured in the pieces. And, beyond Jessica making a space for it, there were different people in the society who collaborated with us too. And Kay Turner had the Curriculum Opportunities Working Group. We talked a couple years before this project materialized, because I was tied up with some other things, and we had that, and that was under her presidency. Norma, and we had a group thinking about how we can have have discussions about some of these topics in the society, and there was Amanda Dargan and Selena Morales and Norma Cantu and a number of other Katie Borland, a number of us were discussing it. I think Sojin and Olivia and Jessica and a number of people met regularly to think about some of these issues as well, to move it forward. There was the FOAF conference in 2017 that Meredith McGriff and Jesse Fivecoat and Christina Downs participated in, that brought these questions up in the society. So speaking to how the society moved, there were lots of points where these conversations were happening, and the need came forward too.
And don't forget the artists to put it together and make it look good. They were it'd be so not readable. She was a genius at helping us create these little gems of exhibit.
Meredith, absolutely, absolutely. And Cecilia did Cecilia, what do you remember Cecilia's last name?
You're asking the wrong person.
Sorry. It's in the booklet. I will find it. Cecilia from the Smithsonian. Where is her? Hallie. Cecilia Hallie designed the booklet using the AFS, some of the AFS colors in its new design, and then Jessica also funded graduate students to work with the project, and Maria was one of those graduate students.
Yep.
But we have Holly Matthews, and we have Alex Sanchez and Gloria Colon.
Mm-hmm. Can we ask Maria to tell us what it was like to work with us?
Yes. So I just want to thank you all for allowing me to work with you guys. Like, it was a definite blessing to be able to work on this project. There was just a lot of things that I did not know. I didn't think about Langston Hughes or James Baldwin and people like that as being, folklorists. I didn't know. And so, what am I trying to say? Just going and just looking up like what everybody did, like their projects, if they did music, if they danced, like everything. That was just amazing just to see like what people of color did. Like, It was a lot of things that I did not know, and I'm just appreciative of this project and that folklorists out there, the American Folklore Society, is putting this out here to let hey, there are people of color out here that's in the folklore field. Let's talk about it. Let's get to know it. So
Did it,
I appreciate everything.
did it in any way make you feel empowered?
Yes, it did. Because if they can do it, I can too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I?
You know,
Go
the
ahead.
same story about needing to see representations of yourself. It makes such a difference. And I have to say that my success has a lot to do with the now ancestors, who reached back and helped me. So we want that to continue.
I was just going to say that, I guess now we can access the exhibit online, and but I think when it first started, like my first encounter with it was those big panels, like these 6 foot tall, like panels with the pictures and and like it was arranged, in the hotel where the meeting was taking place, and it was like you were walking around with all these people from history, like the ancestors were there with us, and it was like this real spiritual kind of experience, and I was like, hello to this person, Jerry, hello, how are you? Like it just felt like you were spending time with them.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Yes, that was Meredith and I talked about banners, but and I had seen I'd worked with another exhibit where they had these portable but standing banners, and I asked Meredith if we could use those, and she said, she made it happen, and I'm glad to hear that you had that spiritual experience too, because it was amazing in Baltimore in particular, where they were spread out in that space, and it was like they were there, like the ancestors were there with us, and that was phenomenal.
Since we do have those panels, do you think that it would be possible to do like a traveling exhibit? Like maybe, I don't know, maybe take it to like a historical society or special collections, or maybe, at a university that has folk studies, maybe have it in their space, just, switch it up every once in a while. Do you think it's something that notable folklorists of color exhibition would do?
Will you help us? That's a great idea.
It is a great idea. We looked into it a little bit, and we have to raise funds to do that for the shipping. But I know IU used it some in between 2019 and 2020. What I'm grateful for, going back to something I said earlier, is that there was material about these people's lives on Google, on the internet, and during COVID, this was my work. Going to all these sites and finding out about the people and writing the panels based on what I could find. There were a few where I did some digging in some archives, but a lot of places, or contacted people to do that digging for me. But with everything shut down during that time, it was such a blessing to have Google to do that work and to bring it forward.
So I'm happy that you said that, because this is a great segue. How many people did you all twist arms to be part of this?
50.
Yeah.
Over 50,
Over 50
people.
wonderful people. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember, was it last year when you had at Tulsa, where you had the reception and the celebration and everything, and I just remember looking in the door and seeing everybody who worked on it. I mean, it wasn't everybody, but it was like a lot of people up front at the front of the room, and it was
Right.
just like such a beautiful collection of people. And it just, I don't know, like when you have been talking about the process and talking about everybody that worked, it's like this is a huge percentage of people in AFS. Like it's like an AFS collective project,
Yeah.
not just a couple of
Yes.
people,
Mm-hmm.
And it extended beyond AFS. We had people from in related fields who contributed to the process, and we introduced them to AFS a bit, and I'm hoping that they will come and join.
Yes, here's the website. Join the wrong website, sorry. Join American Folklore Society, okay? And then you can also be part of whatever section you desire. We always promote the African American Folklore section, but there are many that are doing great work.
The Latino section welcomes you too.
That's right. Well, you know what? Let me ask you, Olivia, because you mentioned this earlier, and so we're going back to revolutionary radical talk for a second. Because I noticed you said it, and I was like, oh, I want to get to that. You know, there's this idea that I believe both just people of color have to deal with, that we're just monolithic people. There's just one type of Black person, one type of Latino person, and you made it clear that in some spaces of Spanish-speaking countries or folk groups, they may not consider themselves Latino, they may consider themselves Hispanic, and so forth and so on. Understanding the terrain of our discipline, how significant and vital is it to get that point across in this project?
It's very, very vital. It's a question of history, history and landscape, where they come from. I mean, we are really talking and recognizing you, and you are not Latine or Latinx. We've already missed it right there. And now discussion opens up for this there. But it's we're not homogeneous. We're not homogeneous in a family, let alone in a group of people that happen to be in part of some Latino descent.
There are so many distinctions. Some of them are political distinctions. Some of them are experiential distinctions. You know, in the African American community, they're those who were Caribbean American, or those who were African and came here and have become African American. There are different cultural experiences. And all of our communities have that. I mean, when you talk about Asian American, Asia's huge. And Chinese is not the same as Turkish. And so it's recognizing that there's a diversity of experiences in all of our groups. The Pueblos aren't the same as the Iroquois. In all of our groups, there's this huge span of diversity.
and conflict too.
And
It has to be recognized because it's part of history. And if you start looking into our lives and the folk life, then you can begin a conversation. Possibly,
yes,
maybe.
right. Yeah, Southern Blacks don't necessarily have the same experience as Midwestern Blacks or Northeastern Blacks, you know?
Or Southeast Washington Blacks and Northeastern Washington Blacks. It's just a completely different milieu. The landscape,
So,
again, back to the landscape. Trying to find that place for the landscape. Learning.
and yet there are some commonalities and sometimes racism forces commonalities.
Yeah.
So are you hoping and working for this project to contribute to breaking down these restrictions and marginalizations of the folk groups in the discipline and in the field, right? Not just of what, because I'm so happy you made that distinction earlier, how there's this idea of academically trained, and then those are the people who do it.
Yeah.
Are you hoping that this project can help remove these margins and I guess misnomers of the folk?
We hope at least to open a conversation.
Yes.
And also to engage younger scholars. Younger scholars surprise me all the time. I think, they have their own way of moving it forward.
Todd, Maria, jump in.
I don't have anything right now. I'm just happy to be here.
I might be out of questions too. I mean, at this point I just want to heap adulation on y'all and thanks and just all the praise in the world for what you've done. But just to reiterate again, that this seems to have been a huge project that brought a lot of people together, and that's going to benefit a lot of people. I mean, I just think you were talking, Phyllis, about how when you were getting your education that maybe more of these folks were recognized and taught than they even are now, which is a kind of a shocking thing to hear. If you sort of think about that, that's a little shocking. But hopefully this project is just the beginning.
Yes.
Of getting these folks back into the classroom, their work, their writing, their performance, their creation, everything, just to get this. I mean, I feel like part of my training is as a literary scholar, and when I was in graduate school, a big part of what I was doing is trying to find these books that were out of print, that were by these great Black authors, but their work had gone out of print, and not because it wasn't good stuff, because nobody was teaching it, and so what this project gives us a place to start, a place to begin, and people to bring this into the classroom, and then the next generation won't have that gap, So I just want to thank y'all for that. I think it's really powerful.
And I hope that people see it across lines. I would be very disappointed if a Latino scholar only looked for the Américo Paredes and all the Latino stuff. If not rather looking at James Baldwin, why is he here together with Américo Paredes? Or, I really encourage that cutting across and seeing the wider panorama. Because it's always easier for us, to just go into one, use one section to follow through. So that's really where I think that's where I will measure success.
I think that is something that I also want to build on. I think that this gives us an opportunity to tell a more integrated history of our field. When we were studying it, there were different silos of folklore. So African American folklore didn't touch African folklore unless you deliberately made that connection. It didn't touch Latin American folklore unless you made that connection. It didn't touch Native American folklore unless you made that connection. And I think that this project shows that there were opportunities where people crossed boundaries, communicated, were influenced by each other, and spoke to those who were doing the traditional, the academic folklore work, or there were interactions between these people and many of the people doing traditional folklore work. And it gives us an opportunity to tell a new and more inclusive story.
Yeah, I think of Leroy Jones, aka Amiri Baraka, when you say that, because he credits his trip to Cuba that really takes his writing to the next level, right? First, I want to, Kay Turner says, I don't know if you all saw on the bottom, that we need a notable community scholars project. I agree with that. Missouri Folk Arts say, thank you to Phyllis and Olivia for gathering all the scholars in the exhibits and the scholars who authored those profiles. And Marilyn White says, one, yes, Phyllis, exclamation. And, and she says, Todd, you went out on your own to find the works. How many people did not do that, thus perpetuating their own ignorance? Well, you know what? Yes. Yes. As an applied folklorist, I have to ask Phyllis, Olivia, is there anything we did not ask that you wanted us or thought we would ask?
You were great. You opened all sorts of possibilities for answering all sorts of levels and things. I really enjoyed talking, and I usually don't talk anymore.
I think you touched many of the important points, and I'm glad that I've been able to be part of this project with the collaborators that we've had in this project. It's been a gift.
Mm-hmm.
So and thank you for having this conversation with us.
Yep.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
This has been a very pleasant way to spend an evening.
And
absolutely.
Very thoughtful
Thank you.
questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And the work speaks for itself. The work is great. Folks, you can go to the Notable Folklorists of Color.org to get updated info and all the information. And there is hyperlinks to the many different things that we discussed. You can go to AmericanFolkloreSociety.org to become a member. There you would also find the Notable Folklorists of Color. You'll also find our annual meeting schedules and things of this nature, and the many sections that you can be part of. Make sure one of those sections is the African American Folklore section. And while you're there, don't forget to apply for the John Wesley Work III Award. Okay, Todd, what is our deadline date?
Our deadline is May 1st is the deadline for submitting an application.
All right, so now you can submit on your own. Mm-hmm. You can submit for someone else, right?
And also, if folks have questions about the award, they can contact us. They can contact either Lamont or myself, or they can contact anyone at the AFS office can help either get them in contact with us or give them information on how to apply. And if you just questions or whatever, we'll work with you. I mean, May 1st is our deadline, but I mean, if that won't work for you, let us know. Maybe we can, make an adjustment. So,
Yes, and the eligibility is on the site, but I will go read it quickly. So all are welcome to apply, including those who are not members of the American Folklore Society or the section. The prize committee will be looking for expertise, promise, or sustained effort in the preservation, study, or transmission of African American folk life. Applicants must demonstrate active participation in the study or documentation of African American expression, whether through audio recordings, podcasts, written essays, publishing in scholarly journals, video production, manuscripts, performance, or any other area of cultural performance. I practiced that. I didn't just do that. Okay, Phyllis, Olivia, thank you for the work that you've done and are doing, and for this project. Maria, Todd, thank you as always. And good folks, you can find this on Jack Dappa Blues radio.tv YouTube page in the live archive section. Should be able to find this somewhere on the American Folklore Society, because they have everything there. So just go through it, search through it, right? And you can also, and while you're at it, the African American Folklore section has a Facebook group. Join that group too. Drop your information, drop your thoughts, drop things that we may need to know because we don't know everything, right? Drop it all in there. And we'll just continue to edify each other and keep folkloring.
Lamont and Todd, thank you so much for your work as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Happy to do it.
Yes, always. Good folks. We'll see y'all on the flip side.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.